Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stenovic live in our Interactive Broker Studio. You know, it is a day where we are focused on the markets. We're focused on this inflation report, but obviously front and center for all of us here in New York City is the shooting in Brooklyn.
Yeah, we're going to get an update from on the ground. Kriti Gupta is going to be joining us in just a minute. She's been there throughout the day, giving us the latest on the ground. First, though, let's get an update on the trading day as we do get less than a half hour away from the close here, Charlie.
Indeed, Tim, we've got 28 minutes to go ahead of the close with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all retreating. At one point, we had the Dow up 361 points. Right now, the Dow is down 187, a drop right now of 0.5%. The S&P lower by 28, down 0.6. NASDAQ is slumping 81 points, down now by 0.6%. At the high of the session, NASDAQ had been up by 2%. 10-year yield 2.70%. Spot gold is up 0.7%. $19.66 the ounce. Oil back above $100 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude surging 6.4%, $100.34 a barrel. That is reigniting inflation worries. Big banks are dropping ahead of the start of the earnings season tomorrow morning. Consumer prices up in March by the most since 1981, bolstering expectations that the Fed will raise rates by about 0.5 point next month. Labor Department data show the consumer price index increased 8.5% from a year earlier. So have we seen the peak in inflation? Reaction to the CPI report from that question this morning for Megan Horniman, who is Chief Investment Officer at Verdance Capital Advisors.
I think we're closer to the peak than we are. I think the next few months are still going to be a bit dicey. I don't want to take 1 month and consider that a trend. I'd like to see this go on over several months where you're truly seeing that those goods priced inflation come down. That's something that the Fed referenced last year, and I think something that you'll see some pretty substantial improvements in the second half of this year.
Energy stocks rallying along with the price of crude oil. ExxonMobil, for example, up 1.9%. BP also up 1.9%. Chevron up 1.94%. EOG Resources up 2.6%. Pioneer Natural up now by 2.3%. Recapping, stocks lower. S&P down 26, down 0.6. 10-year yield now 2.71%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stenovic. Our most read story on the Bloomberg has been that way for hours, is that New York City subway shooter. Still at large, police shifting the focus from the terror and concerns about what happened there specifically, but really trying to find the individual who is still there at large. Let's go to our Kriti Gupta. She is on the phone in Brooklyn. So just get us up to speed. Just remind us about what we know about this, Kriti.
Yeah, so let's just start off with what actually happened in the subway. You actually had the gunman release a smoke canister within a subway car. Once it pulled up to the 36th Street station, which is where we're reporting from right now, the doors opened and essentially panic, chaos ensued, and that's really where you saw the smoke come out and calls made to the fire department. Since then, we have discovered that 16 people were injured, 10 of them shot, 5 of them in critical condition. Other injuries include things like shrapnel, panic, mental trauma, of course, and of course, smoke inhalation. We haven't yet heard an update on what the condition of those 16 people that are injured is. The hunt for the gunman, though, still largely afoot.
What is happening on the ground there as we speak right now, Kriti? You've been there throughout the day today, and I'm wondering what you see with regards to police presence, with onlookers right now, with investigators. Give us the latest.
Yeah, well, when we came here, I want to say about 10 o'clock-ish this morning, you had about a 20-block perimeter put around the 36th Street station. That has since disappeared. You do have school, for example, let out at about 3 o'clock, so a lot of children have gone home. A lot of people are commuting still. You do see some residents have kind of come out of hiding, which we haven't seen in a while. As for police presence, a lot of it has disappeared. That being said, the 36th Street station in Brooklyn is still a crime scene, so you do have an active presence there as well. Media are not allowed near it. Media are also not allowed near the school that was in shelter in place for most of the day. So right now, a lot of the two-way traffic in front of the station has resumed, but it really isn't as active as maybe it would have been, say, even 24 hours ago.
Yeah, and we've been talking about, Creedy, that for anybody who's thinking about commuting home, we're all getting guidance about where to go, where not to go, because we have to remember that the gunman is still at large.
Yeah, and this is really where you have partnerships with private institutions coming in. Uber, for example, waiving their surge fares right now. You have a lot of companies that operate in the New York City area whose residents live in Brooklyn. You have messages going to them that they're willing to subsidize the commute home if they need to take a cab or if they needed to take a Lyft or an Uber, for example. So that is all good news in terms of trying to get people home. The real question here is going to be what comes tomorrow. Do you see a little bit of hesitance when it comes to a lot of people going to work tomorrow, especially in terms of commuting on the subway, going into the city, or perhaps more of an inclination to work from home?
As our own Laura Nemes writes, Mayor Adams says that the city's subways are safe. He said, quote, "I ride the subway often and we, quote, cannot allow terror to terrorize us so we don't function as a city." So he called on New Yorkers to be resilient and saying that the subways are safe. There is, though, an economic cost to this, too, Creedy. If we think big picture here, tourism was starting to come back to New York City. The subway was not even close to pre-pandemic levels, but more and more people are supposed to be going back to the office right now. How big of a setback is this economically for New York City at this point?
This could be a pretty big setback, but remember, you are still dealing with a city that's very much dealing with COVID, and it's dealing with changes on the ground in terms of how people commute, how people work. I mean, think about it. A lot of companies in New York are still not back in the office 5 days a week, and that's something that's very different, say, markedly from other major cities around the country. Dallas, for example, which is where I grew up and where I'm from, a lot of my friends are saying they are back in the office 5 days a week. They have their mask mandate removed. New York City is not there yet, and that's something I think that's very much been on Eric Adams' agenda, trying to get the city moving again. This, of course, puts a little bit of a hiccup in those plans.
We should point out that former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, catching up with our TV colleagues, saying that the New York Police Department will find the shooter suspect quickly. Hey, Creedy, you've been following this, just got about 30, 40 seconds here. Just quickly, what's top of mind for you since you've seen this and been covering it from the beginning?
Well, top of mind here is really what the motivation was, right? And that's really where you're seeing some delicate language being used around whether this was an act of terror or simply terrorism. The NYPD, the fire department, has actively said this is not terrorism. But Mayor Eric Adams has said this is terror, and just based on the evidence that it's already collecting, this was clearly a planned attack. So I think the next step here, in addition to finding out whether the injured are actually okay, is to find out what the motivation was here.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Hey, Creedy, thank you so much. Our Bloomberg Markets correspondent, Creedy Gupta, on site, on the phone in Brooklyn. She's been covering this, and we know the president has also been briefed on the shooting earlier. So certainly all eyes covering this and just waiting, as she said, top of mind in terms of finding the shooter and finding what that motivation was.
Yeah, police right now are knocking on doors, looking for the shooter, who you mentioned is still on the loose. The suspect is a short, heavyset black man who was donning a gas mask and a green construction vest, this according to the NYPD.
All right, back to World of National News. On it, Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hi, Nance.
Well, this is the story of the day. A New York City shooter does remain at large after 16 people were injured, including 10 people with gunshot wounds. This happened during a chaotic morning rush hour incident at a subway station in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. New York Mayor Eric Adams tells CNN they are unsure who the suspect is, but they will not give up in the search.
There's going to be a collaboration of efforts and information sharing so we could apprehend the person who's responsible. This was a senseless act of violence that was inflicted on our passengers in our subway system.
Mayor Adams says the person responsible detonated a smoke canister on a subway car, then started firing. Police are now looking for a U-Haul truck with Arizona plates. President Vladimir Putin says peace talks with Ukraine are at a dead end, and he's vowing to continue Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He says the 7-week offensive is going according to plan, and he called claims of war crimes in Bucha fake news. A notorious hacking group linked to Russian military intelligence is now accused of going after Ukraine's energy facilities.
Ukrainian cybersecurity officials say the group known as Sandworm tried to damage high-voltage electrical substations, computers, and networking equipment in 2 waves of attacks last Friday. They say they have been able to block the hackers so far. Researchers at the cybersecurity firm ESET say the hackers deployed viruses that can wipe computer data and interact with industrial control systems. A similar attack tied to Sandworm caused a blackout in Ukraine 6 years ago. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City in our studio. And Uber and Lyft turning off surge pricing in the Sunset Park area of Brooklyn after the ride-hailing giants' algorithms increased fares in the wake of that shooting earlier today.
Rates for a ride on the app spiked after New York City's emergency alerts advised people to avoid the area near the 36th Street subway station, where 16 people were injured, 10 with gunshot wounds, and numerous undetonated devices were discovered inside the station.
It's how these apps work.
Yeah, it is. And look, you know, Uber and Lyft also said, Lyft spokesperson, we should note, said the company is also, quote, working to adjust fares for certain riders who paid primetime prices when the situation first unfolded. The story features a tweet showing that somebody got fares being slightly higher due to increased demand in the Sunset Park area. I think the story is bigger than just Sunset Park, though, Carol, because if you think about this from the perspective of people like me, I'll use me for an example. I'm going to take an Uber or a Lyft home today, and I might not be going to the Sunset Park area, and I might be ordering the Uber from Midtown Manhattan, but demand will probably be higher because a lot of people will be in my situation, people who normally take the subway home, but would rather avoid the subway. So it means that surge pricing could still hit people as a result of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I see it, you know, as something as simplistic as rain, right? Yeah. Kicks in the, you know, there are algorithms, how it works. And the whole concept is, you know, as there's more demand, prices go up. But as the prices go up, then that should bring in more drivers that will ultimately push down prices. But we know it doesn't always work that way. Uber, by the way, does have a global security center. It operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and flags issues that could impact businesses and customers. During major emergency events, the company's policy is to immediately cap trip pricing in the affected area. Customers can also report issues through the app.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening in the coming days and weeks with regard to people using public transit, if there will still be increased demand for services such as these in affected areas.
Unfortunately, it's like basic supply and demand. Yeah. I'm not saying it's right. It's just kind of the way it works, but it's good to see that they are addressing it. This is Bloomberg.
headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all in the red. At one point, the Dow was up 361 points, up 1%. Right now, the Dow is down at 94, lower by 0.3. S&P down 15, a drop there of 0.4%. NASDAQ is lower by 30, a drop of 0.2%. Stocks retreated as a surge in oil above $100 a barrel reignited inflation worries, while big banks dropped ahead of the start of the financial earnings season tomorrow morning. JP Morgan Chase will be first out of the gate. JPM down now by 1.2%. 10-year yield 2.71%. Spot gold up 0.7%. 1968 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 6.5% to $100.45 a barrel. Again, recapping, S&P down 11, a drop right now of 0.3%. Comedian Gilbert Gottfried has died. Gottfried was the voice of the Aflac duck until 2011. Gilbert Gottfried dead at age 67. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. It's 3:48 on Wall Street.
The following is an editorial from Bloomberg Opinion.
The U.S. is one of the world's wealthiest countries, but its broken retirement savings system leaves too many Americans facing the prospect of poverty in old age. Lawmakers keep trying to fix the system with tweaks, such as 2019's Secure Act and a sequel now under consideration. Among other things, these initiatives seek to increase automatic enrollment in 401k plans, cover part-time employees, and nudge more small businesses to offer benefits. That's not good enough. The U.S. needs a more comprehensive approach. One that offers universal coverage, a limited menu of well-curated investments, easy portability when workers change jobs, and subsidies for the low-paid. Such a system would reduce risks, maximize returns, and benefit the broader economy, while ensuring many more Americans can retire comfortably. If Congress hopes to address this impending crisis, it will need to show a lot more ambition. This editorial was written by the Bloomberg Opinion Editorial Board. I'm David Shipley. For more Bloomberg Opinion, please go to Bloomberg.com/opinion or OPI and Go on the Bloomberg terminal.
This has been Bloomberg Opinion.
I'm driving in my car.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, just about 10 minutes left in today's trading session. It's been an interesting day. We, of course, got that CPI print, that core number coming in a little bit light. And initially, we saw some enthusiasm and risk on trade when it comes to the equity markets. But that is not the story now. We are seeing equities, just as we heard from Charlie, just off our lows of the session. So let's talk about the markets.
Let's get into it with Veronica Willis, investment strategy analyst at Wells Fargo Investment Institute. She joins us on the phone from St. Louis. Veronica, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
We're doing okay. It's been a kind of a wild day here. Yeah.
Yes.
I do want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the markets because, well, if we look at the S&P 500, we're pretty much at levels that we were last at back in mid-March, depending on where you look, March 17th or so. I'm wondering how you explain the volatility that we've been seeing.
I think there's a lot of volatility around what's going on with inflation, a lot of volatility related to geopolitics, and we're off of those lows from the worst of the correction in the S&P 500, and we're really seeing some confusion around this inflation data that's come out. Headline numbers were a little bit worse than what we were expecting, but then looking at the core CPI. Some encouraging data there just in terms of, could this be the peak with energy prices a little bit lower than what we had seen last month? And so could we expect maybe next month some relief in that inflation number? And I think the market is taking all of this information into consideration, and that's why we're seeing a lot of volatility here.
I feel like there's just so many unknowns. There was a great column that I read on the Bloomberg today, and basically it just said when it comes to the Fed, understand that there's no clairvoyance from the Federal Reserve. Don't expect it. They are going to take each meeting, look at the situation in front of them, and make a decision based on that. And if that means being more aggressive as a Fed, they'll do it. If it means backing off because they're concerned about either doing too much or the economic data starts to come undone, that's what we're going to get. Is that how we need to kind of think about it, that understand the Fed's going to be doing this in real time?
Absolutely. The Fed takes into consideration everything that's going on with the economy, everything that's going on with inflation, and they're being very transparent with us and letting us know exactly what they're thinking and what their path forward that they see at that moment is each time that the notes come out, each time that they have a meeting. And so I think that that transparency from the Fed is a very good thing. The Fed knows what's going on with the economy, and they know what they have to do, and they've told us, what their plans are each step of the way.
But plans don't mean anything. It doesn't matter until they sit down, right, at the Federal Reserve the day of a meeting and say, okay, where are we?
Absolutely. And, as of now, we're thinking that there's going to be a 50 basis point rate hike in May, maybe another 50 in June. But, of course, all of that can change. A lot can happen between now and May.
Well, let's talk about where you should be deploying money right now, at least in your opinion. Thanks for the notes that you sent before and to our producer, Paul Brennan, who got these to us. U.S. large cap and U.S. mid cap over U.S. small cap. Why is that?
So we think that right now we're in that portion of the economic cycle where we're shifting from kind of mid to late cycle, and that's where we think that large and mid cap can really shine over something like small cap that's more cyclical, that tends to do better in that earlier part of the economic cycle when we're seeing that stronger economic growth. The large and mid cap stocks are higher quality, so we're expecting to see a little bit more return on equity there in those spaces, as opposed to something like small cap, which, as I said, is a little bit more cyclical, and certainly with a better expectation for U.S. stocks over international stocks, just stemmed in our expectation for U.S. economic growth to be the outperformer on the global stage.
Veronica, it's a big week for the big bank earnings, right? And we're all going to be all over them starting tomorrow. I've been looking at the KBW Bank Index. It's down about another 1.4% today, down 11% year to date, but down 20% from the January 13th high. I find that a little perplexing considering the move up in rates, which we've all been saying as soon as we start to see movement up in rates, this is going to be good for the net interest margin at all of these big banks. What do you make of the pressure that we are seeing in those big bank names?
I think that expectations are that earnings might be a little bit underwhelming for the first quarter. We have seen a move up in rates, but it wasn't widespread throughout the entire first quarter, so we might not start to see that benefit for financials until the second quarter comes out. And so I think that's what we're seeing right now in this data, that there could be some disappointments in those first quarter earnings for these banks. So I think that's what the market's watching out for right now.
Is it already priced in, though, then, at this point, considering how much pressure has been on these names?
I would think that it's been priced in, but the market is pretty unpredictable. They're looking very closely at what they're expecting the banks to come out with. We'll see some earnings tomorrow to see what that picture really looks like.
What about picture of the economy? One of the reasons we love talking or hearing from the banks is because we get a good take on their read on the economy sometimes. And I'm wondering what we should be looking for from the banks when it comes to their commentary around that.
Well, I think right now, looking at the U.S., we're expecting 2.6% GDP growth, which is a little bit higher than average, but pretty close to an average economic growth, but much lower than the high growth that we've seen in 2021. We're looking very closely at signs that are signaling a slowdown in that economic growth in the U.S., but not expecting a recession this year for the U.S. Outside of the U.S., a little bit of a different story.
What about next year in the U.S.?
Next year in the U.S., the risks that there might be a recession are rising. We haven't made an official call on whether or not there will be a recession, but it's something in consideration with move higher in rates that the Fed pretty much has no choice to do with what's going on with inflation. It'll be really key to see whether or not they can orchestrate this soft landing to give us a better sense of what might happen in 2023 with economic growth.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Covered a lot of ground. Thank you. Veronica Willis, she is investment strategy analyst at Wells Fargo Investment Institute, joining us on the phone from St. Louis. And here we are with just a few minutes left in the trading session. We have come off our lows of this session, but still down 0.4% on the S&P 500. Dow Jones Industrial Average, a decline of just shy of 0.3%. And the NASDAQ, same story, down about 1/3%, Tim. But a different picture from what we saw earlier in the day.
Yeah, it certainly was. Coming up next, we are talking to our Bloomberg TV team for our Beyond the Bell and our countdown to the close. It's our simulcast.
Yeah, it's coming up in just a moment, and we're going to talk about, obviously, what's going on in the trade, talk about that CPI print, and, of course, keeping an eye on the news out of Brooklyn.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic and Caroline Hyde here, counting you down to the closing bell. And here to help take us beyond the bell, Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic. We welcome our audiences across Bloomberg Television, radio, and YouTube. And Carol, taking a look at the markets here, we should point out that all of the major indices did open in the green today, but right now almost all of them are in the red here. So still some concerns here about the economic picture.
A much more negative tone here with just a few minutes left in the trading session. I got to say, Romaine, I've been keeping an eye on the bank stocks, down about 1.4%. JPM, of course, JP Morgan reporting tomorrow. This group is down about 20% from January 13th. We've seen a lot of pressure. So I'm wondering, Tim, will they maybe come out better than expected tomorrow, or will they kind of, show the negativity that we've seen in the trade in these names so far this year?
Yeah, that's a question, but I'm also thinking bigger picture when it comes to these bank stocks and getting an idea from them about how consumers are using credit cards, what consumer spending is looking like, and if we can get any insight into sentiment and how they're seeing across their customers, because they have such a good look at the economy.
And I think we have to address sentiment at this moment right now. Of course, a day where sentiment took a real hit in the city that we know, that we love, and a place where we all want to get back to normal at the moment. So I think there's a focus on how consumers are dealing with the situation thus far. I think this is an interesting day to be trying to address markets and indeed us as New Yorkers.
Yeah, and we address those markets. We should point out, in addition to that CPI data, there were a couple of interesting sentiment data points, at least as far as investors are concerned, and business owners at NFIB Small Business Sentiment Indicator, as well as that Bank of America survey, which continue to show a little bit of pessimism and concern here amongst investors and business owners. Maybe that's playing in to what you're seeing on the screen here. We are getting the closing bells here in New York. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is going to finish down by more than 80 points here on the day, down by about 0.2%. The S&P 500 now going to log a third day of declines here, down about 15 points or 0.3%. The NASDAQ Composite down about 40 points or 0.3%. One of the bright spots, though, is the Russell 2000. It had fallen for 5 straight days prior to today. It opened in the green and actually stayed in the green. Looks like it's going to close higher by about 0.3%, Carol.
And Romaine, in a day where once again we saw some volatility, finishing off way off our highs of the day, I wanted to check out the volatility index, the VIX, just up a hair, but coming in at 24.53, Caroline.
Meanwhile, let's have a little look at some of the individual industry groups that we keep such a close eye on at this particular part of the market close. We look at what's outperformed on the day. Well, we have had a down 0.3%, but still outperformance is once again the industry group that has done so well throughout the entire year. It is energy index up more than 1.7%. That, as we see once again, oil above $100 a barrel, in reigniting those inflation worries that, of course, we addressed with the 8.5% print a little bit earlier. Autos on the higher side, tech, utilities, but on the downside, really notable as we address the earnings season that almost is upon us with the likes of JP Morgan, banks off by 1.3%.
All right, so you guys were talking about sentiment. This is really important because we know it can in fact impact certainly market moves. It can impact in terms of consumers, whether they feel confident enough to go out and buy things. Well, Bank of America coming out in May surveyed a bunch of fund managers, and they are saying that they're the most gloomy on record on recession woes specifically. But what's interesting is that they've actually got a signal, a market signal, a contrarian indicator, and it's so bearish, it's triggering their buy signal when it comes to stocks. So, that happens, right? Whenever so much gloom and doom is out there that ultimately people say, okay, maybe this is a time to buy?
It also affects consumer behavior, and you have to think about inflation expectations versus inflation that we're seeing. There's a great article by Claire Ballantyne and Charlie Wells a little earlier today on the Bloomberg, and it talks about a Harris poll that Bloomberg News that Harris poll did on behalf of Bloomberg News, and more than 80% of people are changing the way that they're spending money as a result of inflation. So perhaps they're buying more now because they think inflation could go up, and it does tend to turn into this self-fulfilling prophecy of people buying more now because they're worried about prices going up later.
Yeah, and you're always reminded, of course, in getting that inflation report here, just how much inflation is outstripping some of those wage gains. Wage gains, of course, that we were all applauding just a few months ago, but now, at least particularly for some of those lower wage workers, you're starting to wonder whether there actually is a net benefit there.
Did you see the Albertsons news earlier today? Albertsons CEO coming out and saying, we're concerned about people at the lower end of the income spectrum because inflation affects them more, and their ability to actually buy food at Albertsons.
And this is the tension for a Federal Reserve, of course, that has to be addressing inequality. Initially, we were worried about the inequality, the lack of openness in a labor market, inclusive labor market, running at full steam to be able to ensure that those have previously been left behind in other upward trajectory cycles are brought on board. But now it's, well, the inequality that inflation inflicts and how the lower income are most affected by all of this.
Well, and this is interesting, right? The Fed had put that out front and center. They wanted to make sure that when the economy came back, that it was inclusive. But how much is the Fed willing to give that up in its fight against inflation, guys?
We just had a really interesting conversation with Veronica Willis, investment strategy analyst at Wells Fargo Investment Institute. She's pretty optimistic about the U.S. economy for the year. She doesn't predict a recession happening this year in the U.S. She can't say the same thing for 2023. They haven't come out with a call yet, but she said it is increasingly a concern.
Yeah, and I mean, I hate to be pessimistic. I mean, look, we're heading into this earnings season, right? I mean, we actually had some lingering earnings from Q4, including CarMax, which reported its Q4 ended in February, which seemed to show a decline, at least in unit sales of cars. Of course, the price of those cars means that revenue was actually up, but some concerns here about margins there. We're going to get Delta Airlines tomorrow morning, so we'll get a read here on travel trends, which we know had been relatively strong. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that airports are still jammed, but how much does that continue?
Yeah. Did you guys see this column by the editors at Bloomberg Opinion piece? And basically, I love the headline on it. Don't expect clairvoyance from the Federal Reserve. And it's just saying, you know, the balance of future supply and demand is unknowable, and so is the correct path for interest rates. I think we need to all be realistic that every meeting is truly a live meeting, but it doesn't, you know, whether the Fed is more aggressive or whether it backs off, they're going to be looking at the current batch of economic data in front of them to really determine policy.
Okay, I want to go back to airports and airlines because what Romaine said.
Oh no, the Cincinnati.
Yeah, here we go. You know, yesterday I was complaining about how much tickets cost. Well, today we got the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that just in the month of March, month over month, airline airfares went up 10.7% year over year, an increase of 23.6%. So it's not just me.
It's not just you.
No.
Is it all domestic? I would want to know international versus domestic. But
yeah, that's a good question.
Again, that comes down to how we want to be spending our money at this moment. We want to suddenly have events, we want to have experiences, we want to have services, and therefore perhaps we see a roll-off in potentially used cars and car prices and the like, but certainly the reallocation of where people put their money to work and how people feel at the moment to be able to do so.
Yeah, and there's also a question, though, of capacity. And I know we keep talking about the ability of the consumer to keep spending, but when you look at household savings rates and things like that that were sort of buffering this economy for so long here, you've seen that line on those charts come down pretty significantly here. Then you combine that with, you know, higher food prices at the grocery store, higher gasoline at the pump here, and you wonder what the capacity is to keep spending on those discretionary items.
Can we just say, though, for TV can see this, but for radio, we're showing a chart and showing that rise that we saw in gasoline prices month over month. I mean, 18%.
That's just from last month.
Which is a huge thing. Yeah. So it's just a reminder that if we start to see some kind of correct in this, that will have a big, you know, impact on what we're seeing in terms of the overall inflation rate.
And it's psychological. I mean, you know, people see that even if you don't drive, you see these prices at the gas pump, at least, you know, as advertised, and it affects you because you see those prices going up.
And it affected the market sentiment today when oil went back above $100 a barrel. Perhaps that's what sort of suddenly pulled back the overall desire to be buying into equities a little bit earlier.
It's rough, man. And some of those data points certainly just are eye-popping. All right, guys, we got to wrap it. That's going to to do it for our cross-platform coverage on radio, on TV, and on YouTube. We will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
Which is something that we were looking forward to. We have, though, a lot more economic news coming our way. PPI tomorrow, so we'll get the producer price index and
Can
the
we
cost
talk
there.
about retail sales, too?
And retail sales then on Thursday, right?
Yeah, we're looking at some numbers. Month-over-month retail sales coming in. The survey says 0.6%, excluding autos month-over-month. We're looking at a gain of 1%. That's according to the Economist surveyed. It could change from there. I do want to go back to some of the inflation data that we got, Carol, because I have this chart in front of me. 48% year-over-year increase in gasoline. We've already seen gas prices start to come down, but Caroline did mention the price of oil hitting $100 a barrel again earlier. We did see used car prices come down 3.8% between February and March, but still, Carol, higher by more than 35% from a year ago.
Right, they're up a lot. And this goes to, again, there's a lot of talk about if these supply chain changes, we understand fundamentally why this is happening, these rises in prices. So do we see demand come down? Is there demand destruction so that people are not going to pay it and they back off on some of their spending? That could bring prices down. Do the supply chains ease, and that helps increase supply, and that will impact prices. This is why I say the Fed's going to go in every meeting and they're going to say, okay, where are we?
Okay, but a lot of caveats here. One, and they're all geopolitical. So one has to do with Russia's invasion of Ukraine 7 weeks in. What happens as a result of the disruption with the oil market? Two, what about COVID, Carol? And what's going on in Shanghai right now, for example, or what Pegatron had to do when it comes to actually stopping production in some cases because of lockdowns and because of rising COVID cases. A COVID zero policy in China wreaks havoc on supply chains.
No, exactly. It hasn't exactly played out as everyone anticipated, which is why, we talked to so many CEOs, and many of them are rethinking. We talked to, was it Mattel that was moving so much of their production back to Mexico or away from Asia
Mattel.
into Mexico?
Yeah, they're doubling their efforts there.
So rethinking kind of where they want to get things. There's a lot at play here, and this is why, I feel like I'm a broken record, but I feel like we just still don't have a very clear picture of what our economy is without all these external factors.
We had the Mattel COO, Richard Dixon, on with us just last week, so check out that interview.
All right, let's get back to world and national news. Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. Federal investigators are still looking for the person responsible for a morning shooting at a subway station in Brooklyn, New York. At least 16 people were injured, 10 of them were shot. New York City Police Commissioner Keyshawn Sewell says the suspect detonated a smoke canister while inside a train, and when the smoke filled the car, he opened fire. Sewell describes the suspect.
He is being reported as a male black, approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall with a heavy build. He was wearing a green construction-type vest and a hooded sweatshirt. The color is gray.
Commissioner Sewell says it is not being investigated as an act of terrorism. Police say they are looking for a U-Haul truck with Arizona plates. Russian President Vladimir Putin was in Russia's Far East today, saying he believes the conflict with the West is inevitable.
Putin was with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, calling Ukraine's troops neo-Nazi forces, saying that Russia's military action in Ukraine was unavoidable and that Russia, quote, didn't have a choice. Putin also hit back at sanctions, saying that Russia is too big to be isolated from the rest of the world. This as Ukraine expects Russia to widen its offensive in the east of the country this week in a push that the U.S. warns will enter a very bloody phase. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Comedian and actor Gilbert Gottfried has died at the age of 67. That's according to his family. His distinctive voice brought life to many animated characters, including Iago in Aladdin.
I can't believe it. I just don't believe it. We're never going to get a hold of that stupid lamp.
Gottfried had been battling a long illness. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic. And we've got a story from our Kat Chiglinski. She follows Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, and she got to how a deal happened in terms of Berkshire and Allegheny.
She's been pretty busy between Allegheny,
That's because
Occidental.
Buffett's been busy. Berkshire's been busy.
Yeah, spending some serious money. A New York City dinner between Warren Buffett and Allegheny Chief Executive Officer Joseph Brandon kicked off on one of Berkshire Hathaway's latest deal hunts. The pair met for dinner back in March. It was March 7th. That was when Buffett made clear that Berkshire was interested in buying Allegheny for $850 a share. That's according to a regulatory filing released on Monday. That conversation would jumpstart Berkshire's bid for Allegheny that culminated in an $11.6 billion deal for the insurer, announced later that month.
Now, it is one of the biggest acquisitions in years for Berkshire, and Buffett, the billionaire CEO of Berkshire, he has really revved up his deal machine as of late, which is why Kat's been busy. With the conglomerate also buying up shares in Occidental Petroleum, we're talking about, and revealing a new equity bet on HP.
Well, at that dinner back in March, Buffett insisted that the price wouldn't include fees for financial advisors. That quirk resulted in an odd $848.02 announced deal price. The fee for Goldman Sachs Group, which is advising Allegheny, would come out of the proceeds for insurers' shareholders.
And it's really kind of interesting to see because we've seen certainly the share prices moving as a result.
I love that little, Kat joined us in the wake of this when that was first reported about the fees for Goldman Sachs.
Yep.
And that was such a fun little tidbit, right? That for years, Warren Buffett hasn't held the deal makers, at least the ones who get paid, in that high of a regard.
Gotta love how he does things. Hey, listen, just want to mention crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Walmart announcing today that John Rainey has been named Walmart's new executive VP and chief financial officer. He will assume those responsibility as of June 6, 2022. He is coming from PayPal specifically, so some new changes in the executive suite.
Yeah, coming as the big box retailer further leans into e-commerce. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg.
This is breaking news from Bloomberg.
We want to take you to Menlo, Iowa, where President Biden is making some comments.
I mean it. I mean it. You ask anyone, if you ever come to Washington, walk into the Congress, say, you know anybody from Iowa? The first thing they'll say, they'll mention their name. Anyway, say, thank you. Thank you for your friendship. To start, I'd like to say a few words about the mass shooting in New York City subway this morning you've all read and heard about. Jill and I, my wife Jill and I, are praying for those that are injured and all those touched by that trauma. And we're grateful for all the first responders who jumped into action, including civilians who didn't hesitate to help their fellow passengers and try to shield them. My team has been in touch with Mayor Adams and New York's police commissioner, and the Department of Justice and the FBI are working closely with the NYPD on the ground. We're going to continue to stay in close contact with New York authorities and as we learn more about the situation over the coming hours and days. And something could have broken between now and the last hour. I haven't heard the news. I haven't spoken to anyone on my staff. But we're not letting up on it until we find out and we find the perpetrator. Now, to the reason I'm here today, I want to thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Congresswoman.
All right, you've been listening to President Biden. Some quick commentary there in Menlo, Iowa. He is there to talk about help for Americans and build back America better. But again, making some quick comments about the shooting in Brooklyn here in New York.
Yeah, he said that he and the First Lady's thoughts are with the people who were affected earlier today. Look, we are still awaiting more updates from the NYPD, from the Fire Department of New York, and national authorities as well, federal authorities, when it comes to the latest. But the suspect still remains at large.
Right, exactly. And still, in terms of a motive, unknown. Hey, we do want to get to a story that Tim and I have really been really trying to bring to our audience here. And this is a story by our Zeke Fox about, it actually was the Bloomberg Big Take recently. It's about a 30-year-old crypto billionaire that sleeps on a beanbag in his office, and he's really got a Robin Hood-like philosophy. Zeke is Bloomberg News financial investigations reporter on the phone from Brooklyn. Zeke, we're finally catching up with you. We've been wanting to talk to you about this story. First of all, who is this 30-year-old?
So his name is Sam Bankman-Fried, and the craziest part about his story to me is that about 10 years ago, when he was in college at MIT in Cambridge, he came to this realization that he wanted to devote his life to doing good for the world. And he attended a talk by a philosopher who was promoting this idea called earning to give. And the idea was that if you had certain kinds of talents, you might be able to do more good for the world by going to work as a banker than by going to work as like a aid worker or a doctor. And that you could just make a lot of money as a banker and give it to charity. And Sam Bankman-Fried heard this talk and he thought, hey, that sounds pretty good. Now here we are 10 years later, he's running a cryptocurrency exchange and he's worth more than $20 billion. And he says he's going to give it all away.
Where is he going to give that money? Where do we think, or what has he said about how he intends to actually give for good?
So the interesting part is that about that is he is part of this movement called effective altruism, and he's generally his giving aligns with other people who are part of it, and they believe that they can sort of mathematically determine which causes generate the best return on investment. And a popular one among effective altruists is malaria prevention. They donate to charities that buy mosquito nets treated with insecticide and distribute them for free in poor countries in Africa. And they think that for $4,500, you can buy and distribute about 1,000 mosquito nets. And the act of doing that will probably save about one life. So they view that as like very high impact. But now you might think, Sam, he's got $20 billion. He could buy a lot of mosquito nets right now. But so far, he's given away, he says, about $100 million, which is not really that much as a percentage of his fortune, and it's less than he spent on naming rights for the Miami Heat's arena, which is now called the FTX Arena after his crypto exchange. So he's saying, I promise I'll give it all away, but the donations so far are a pretty small part of his fortune.
Well, to be fair, FTX is still a privately held company, right? So a lot of his fortune is tied up in, what are considered a private class of shares. So he doesn't necessarily have the liquidity, right, to give that money away yet.
Yes, and that's what he'd say is that as a percentage of his liquid net worth, he has given a lot away. But I think it's an interesting question because he is like building for the future. He's investing a lot, and he thinks, he's going to be able to give more away in the long run this way. But that said, I mean, someone like him, when is the time going to come that it's right to give it away? Because won't he always see more and more profitable opportunities? I think it's like it'll be an interesting challenge for him to see if he actually really surrenders his wealth and power and gives it all away in like the near future, or ends up acting more like a traditional tycoon who, even the most charitably minded billionaires, we see them just get richer and richer because their fortunes grow faster than they give it away.
And they're not necessarily living in a house with a bunch of roommates and sleeping on bean bags, right? And driving old cars.
Yes, that's true. And he says he basically lives like it sounds like a lot like he did at MIT, except now he's in the Bahamas where he's moved because of its more
a bit warmer,
friendly crypto regulations. Yes, and warmer and less COVID restrictions.
Hey, listen, just got about 40 seconds left here, Zeke. There's a deep dive. There's so much detail. It's a really rich story to read over. Why do you think it was important to bring this individual to light for our audience?
I think that there's like a lot of people who are making a lot of money in cryptocurrency, and it can start to seem sort of like abstract and almost like fake. And so I went to the Bahamas to see this guy in person and to find out, like, yes, like he's a real person with this crazy philosophy, and he really has made all this money in cryptocurrency. And I think it'll be interesting to see if he does what he says with it.
20 seconds. Does he seem like a pretty quote unquote normal guy? You spent some time with him.
I would say more normal than you'd think. Like he's very he can be charming. He's not like he's certainly not like he's not one of these coders who can't talk to somebody. Part of his skill is leading people and but
Zeke, we're gonna have to leave it there.
Questions.
It's a fantastic deep dive. Yeah, please do come back soon. Zeke Fox, financial investigations reporter for Bloomberg News. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 1061 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, you're watching, yes, on YouTube and listening on Bloomberg Radio. Been a nutty day. Hey, listen, there's a lot of money going into ESG investments. We'll talk some numbers in just a moment. And a lot of companies continue to amp up their initiatives when it comes to environmental, social, and governance.
Yeah, in just a minute, we're going to be speaking with Joanne Dwyer, the Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability at CVS Health. First, though, let's get a check of how the markets closed and business news. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. Turned out to be a down day with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining, giving up earlier gains. We had a surge in oil above $100 a barrel. That reignited inflation worries. After the bell, we learned that Walmart has hired John Rainey of PayPal as its new chief financial officer. Rainey served in the same role at PayPal Holdings. Walmart had previously announced the departure of the current CFO, Brett Biggs. Walmart down 0.7%, PayPal down by 2.6%. Consumer prices up in March by the most since late 1981, bolstering expectations that the Fed will raise rates by 0.5 point next month. Labor Department data showed that the consumer price index increased 8.5% from a year earlier, following a 7.9% annual gain in February. Now, what about the next Fed meeting? Veronica Willis is investment strategy analyst at Wells Fargo Investment Institute. And right here on Bloomberg Business Week, she told us the Fed has been very clear.
As of now, we're thinking that there's going to be a 50 basis point rate hike in May, maybe another 50 in June. But of course, all of that can change. A lot can happen between now and May.
And today, the S&P was down 15, a drop of 0.3%. The Dow down 87, down 0.3. NASDAQ down 40, a drop also of 0.3%. 10-year yield 2.71%. Spot gold up 0.6% today. Gold at $19.64 the ounce. Crude $100.66 a barrel, up 6.7%. CarMax shares declined today by 9.5%. Its fourth quarter used vehicle sales missed analyst estimates. An analyst at Citigroup say Apple is poised to boost buybacks by $90 billion with a new repurchase program and a dividend increase. Again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Just, of course, our main story, our top story here in New York City, a gunman in a gas mask and a construction vest setting off a smoke canister on a rush hour subway train in Brooklyn. That was earlier this morning, shooting at least 10 people. This is according to authorities. Police still scouring, though, the city for that shooter, and it seems to be a rental truck. I'm reading from the latest AP story.
Let's bring in Caleb Melby, who continues to be on site in south of Brooklyn. Caleb, what's the latest that you're seeing on site there, on the ground, where this shooting took place?
Yeah, absolutely. Things are starting to clear up around the 36th Street subway station, but down here in South Brooklyn, the sound of chopters overhead is omnipresent as they hunt for that gunman. Schools had been in a shelter-in-place mode. Earlier this afternoon, I saw parents gathering outside of the school to pick up their kids. Kids have at area schools are now on their way home, and there's signs of normalcy here. I saw Department of Sanitation picking up the recycling late, which I can tell you as an area resident is pretty normal here for South Brooklyn. So people are starting to go about their lives again.
What's the latest that we're hearing from authorities? Carol, just now reading from the Associated Press that now they're looking for more clues. They've found more clues as to where the whereabouts of this suspect could be.
Yeah, absolutely. They're looking for a U-Haul van. They released a license plate number, and we've also heard that we can expect perhaps sometime as soon as this afternoon or early evening a photo of the suspect as well as this manhunt continues.
Right. All right. Appreciate it. Bloomberg News' Caleb Melby there on site in Brooklyn. Police Commissioner Keyshawn Sewell saying that the attack was not being investigated as terrorism, but that she was, quote, not ruling out anything.
So leaving that open.
Exactly.
That's my interpretation.
Exactly. All right. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master, Tim Stanovic. Bloomberg Intelligence reported earlier this year about ESG, saying it may surpass 41 trillion assets this year, 50 trillion by 2025, making it 1/3 of the projected total assets under management globally. Tim, it's a lot. It's what investors want. And we often talk with heads and leaders within companies about their growing ESG initiatives.
One of those companies is CVS Health. Joanne Dwyer is Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability at CVS Health. She joins us on Zoom from Rhode Island. Joanne, good to have you with us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Tim. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Well, earlier this month, CVS Health published its first ESG report. Why was this the year to do this? Why now?
So this is actually our 15th annual report. We used to call it our Corporate Social Responsibility Report, but as you just mentioned, the environmental and the social commitments that companies make and the way that companies govern them has really taken center stage in terms of the business community. And so when it comes to reporting and to transparency, we felt it was important to change the nomenclature and really position it as an ESG report, highlighting those commitments that our company makes.
What's top of mind, and where do you see that you guys have made the most progress? We talk about ESG, Joanne, so much, and there's certain parts of ESG that are much easier for the world, for investors to measure, but not all of it, because it's not apples to apples from company to company. So talk to us about your initiatives and where you feel like you're making the most progress because you can measure it the best.
Yeah, I mean, I think a few critical points to think about is, as you just said, you can't be all things to all people. And so it's important to do what's either called a materiality assessment or a topic prioritization. And we did that this year. So as a healthcare company, it won't surprise you that when you think about the issues we care about, they're really centered on the health of people, the health of our communities, and the health of our planet. And so we set a 10-year roadmap. I think the second really important thing to think about is you have to have near-term goals, but you also have to be thinking about this in the long term to be able to have meaningful impact in the long range. And so we focus our strategy in 4 key areas. We have 4 pillars. It's our Healthy 2030 strategy, looking a decade out, and we're focused on healthy people, healthy business, healthy community, and healthy planet.
We only have about 30 seconds left with you, and then we're going to come back for more. But I want to start with just talking about reducing waste. And can you give us some figures on how much you've reduced waste?
So our commitment, I will say, to the environment really starts with our commitment to climate. So hopefully we'll get to that. But our company is working on reducing our waste, starting with our paper and plastic. And so we've diverted about 50% of all of our waste to recycling or reuse.
All right, Joanne Dwyer, stick with us because we're going to take a break. Then we're going to come back with you and dive deeper into ESG at CVS Health. That's Joanne Dwyer, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability at CVS Health. She joins us via Zoom from Rhode Island. Carol, other pillars, too, to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And ESG is something that, we have been talking about for years, and you are getting much more specificity out of companies. So looking forward to getting back with her. In the meantime, we do want to get an update on world and national news for you. Our Nancy Lyons is in our 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hi, Nance.
Hey, thanks, Carol. Police in New York City are still on the hunt for that suspect who set off a smoke grenade and started shooting people on a subway train traveling through Brooklyn this morning. Officials say at least 16 were injured, including 10 who were shot, 5 in critical condition. During a stop this afternoon in Iowa, President Biden spoke about the attack.
Jill and I, my wife Jill and I, are praying for those that are injured and all those touched by that trauma. And we're grateful for all the first responders who jumped into action, including civilians who didn't hesitate to help their fellow passengers and try to shield them.
President Biden says his administration is being kept up to date on the search for the suspect, who has been described as a 5'5" black man. Police are also looking for a U-Haul truck with Arizona plates. The inflation rate is at its highest rate in years, with prices last month 8.5% higher than March of 2021. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has more on the Biden administration's reaction.
White House economic advisor Jared Bernstein focused on the spike in energy costs in a Bloomberg interview.
1.2% is the monthly rate. 63% of that increase is due to gas alone. In other words, This is very much with the fingerprints of Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and its impact on commodity prices.
Bernstein said the president's plan to expand sales of ethanol-blended gasoline could cut the cost at the pump by 10 cents a gallon, on top of continuing releases from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic. We're going to get back to Joanne Dwyer over at CVS Health in just a moment. In the meantime, turns out, I love when Matt Boyle put something out on the Bloomberg. He's doing this with Ryan Cavataro. 1 or 2 days in the office, turns out it's the sweet spot when it comes to hybrid work.
Yeah, you only come into the office 1 or 2 days a week, right, Carol?
That's not true. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, okay. So this is according to, this is a great story, as Carol mentioned, by Matthew Boyle and Ryan Cavataro. Just 1 or 2 days in the office provides workers with the flexibility they crave without the isolation of going fully remote. The findings are from a paper from Harvard Business School, and they're based on an experiment in the summer of 2020 where 130 administrative workers were randomly assigned to one of 3 groups over 9 weeks. Some spent less than 25% of their workdays in the office. Some were in for more than 40% of the time, while a third intermediate cohort landed in the middle, translating to a day or 2 per week. That subset turned out more original work than the other groups, and this difference was significant, the authors wrote.
All right, so the paper, co-authored by Harvard Associate Professor Prithwarshi Chowdhury, intermediate hybrid work is plausibly the sweet spot where workers enjoy flexibility and yet are not as isolated compared to peers. Hey, who are predominantly
Carol.
working from home. What?
My question is, okay, so the summer of 2020 was a really strange time.
It was
that
really
was
odd.
That was weird. There were
stressful.
no vaccines available.
Yep.
And we were just adjusting to this, still adjusting to working from home. So I'm wondering how this changes if they were to do this, in the summer of 2022, and if they were to find other things, because I know that some people are getting tired of working from home.
Yeah, I think, having said that, I mean, I don't know if you're talking your book there, Stanovic, but a lot of people that I talk to here and elsewhere like the flexibility, love it. If they've got kids, they like it. If they aren't, don't have to deal with a big commute, they love the option of having some time at home.
All right, I come in every day, so I can't speak for hybrid work.
You get a little one at home.
I know.
You get a little bit of a break.
It's true.
You're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks finish lower in a run-up to bank earnings. J.P. Morgan will kick off financial results with the war in focus. Today, J.P. Morgan Chase shares declined 1.1%. We'll be hearing from them bright and early tomorrow morning. And then Thursday, Citigroup and Wells Fargo. Today, Citigroup shares down 0.4%. Wells Fargo lower today by 1.8%. Stocks declined as a surge in oil above $100 a barrel reignited inflation worries. Big banks lower ahead of the earnings season that begins tomorrow. S&P 500 erased gains that were earlier driven by speculation that price pressures could be near a peak. S&P down 15, a drop of 0.3%. The Dow down 87, a drop of 0.3. Nasdaq down 40, a drop also of 0.3%. 10-year yield 2.72%. Spot gold up $12 the ounce to $19.65, up 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 6.9%, $100.83 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, appreciate that update. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic. We are talking about CVS Health's annual ESG report, the latest one just out, about ESG initiatives more broadly with Joanne Dwyer. She is VP of Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability at CVS Health, still with us via Zoom from Rhode Island. Hey, Joanne, I do want to get back to what are the things that you can really measure so well so that you can say, hey, we are really making a constructive impact?
So I think in our case, when you think about being a healthcare innovation company, within our Healthy People pillar, we're really thinking about from now to 2030, impacting 65 billion healthcare interactions. And so that's through our CVS Pharmacy locations, our Minute Clinic locations, through our Aetna plans, through our Caremark plans, and really making sure that healthcare is accessible and changing the way we think about healthcare. So it's on your corner, but it's also in the palm of your hand. And if you think about our commitments to community, we really want to fill the gaps of our commercial business. So ensuring that underserved and at-risk populations have that same access to healthcare, right. Advancing health equity and reducing disparities is really top of mind for us. So we're committing $1.5 billion over the next 10 years to ensure that we can reduce those disparities that we're seeing.
How do you, because I always find, right, that we've had so many conversations, Tim and I and our whole Bloomberg News team over the last couple of years, because of COVID. I'm sure you have had it as well as George Floyd in terms of inclusivity. But what are the specific moves that really move the needle in terms of making sure that healthcare and your services get out to parts of our population that have been really left behind?
I think two things are critical. I think it's important to recognize that even though there are people who may be under or uninsured, there's also going to be people who have hesitancy in terms of the healthcare system. So we work really closely with community partners at the really local level. And so, we're not going to assume that everybody can get to a CVS to get vaccinated. We've put up pop-up clinics and free clinics in community health centers and YMCAs around the country, specifically referring to COVID. We also launched earlier this year an initiative called Health Zones. And Health Zones is really focused on addressing the key social determinants of health. So in addition to ensuring that people have actual access to healthcare, we want to make sure that they have transportation that gets them to those doctor's appointments. We want to make sure that they have education that advances their health literacy and helps them to, better understand how to achieve their best health. Affordable housing, because as you can imagine, if you don't have housing, it's extremely difficult to care about your and your family's health. And so we're really looking at housing, education, access to food.
That's a big deal.
Transportation. And so our health zones are really focused at the zip code level so that we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're really trying to be really local in helping people find these services.
Joanne, I don't mean to be cynical here, but this is a publicly traded company. You're responsible to shareholders. You think about top line and the bottom line, and the company's C-suite certainly does too. And I'm wondering how you can draw some sort of line from the initiatives that you take on an ESG basis to the health of the business and helping the business grow.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you think about it from a healthcare standpoint, reducing overall healthcare costs in the communities that we serve, reducing emergency room visits, that helps everybody. That helps our business, and that helps, obviously the communities that we serve. And if you think about it from our commitments to the environment and specifically our goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and eliminate our reliance on greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050, there is real risk related to climate and weather related events that impact our business. Hurricanes, flood, fires, those impact our business and cost us money. So the investments that we're making in those places are really helping us. And I think our shareholders are asking us to be mindful of these things more and more.
Well, and it's interesting, too, and I think about, one of the things that we've been kind of obsessing over, and maybe rightfully so, is, the SEC putting out rules that would require publicly traded companies, to talk about climate-related risks and metrics, and so we are increasingly seeing regulators, step up to the plate and want to know more on this. How does that impact what you are doing? And basically, it speaks to transparency, and investors increasingly who are committing so much money, they really want to know, if I'm making an ESG investment, am I really getting what I'm investing in?
Yeah, and we're fortunate because we've been, reporting our data, especially around climate, for such a long time. But when you think about it, this doesn't just impact our company; it impacts our broad supply chain also. And if you think about what I was just talking about in terms of climate-related events, there is substantive risk, or can be substantive risk, to your business. And so the SEC is saying, we really want you to think about that risk, and we want you to audit that risk the way you would audit other financial risks to your business. And so, just as, at home, we want to wash our clothes in cold water and we want to turn our lights off when we leave a room, at our size and scale, we're thinking about the things that impact us and that can help us save money, but also can help us protect the planet in the long term.
So when it comes to, you say 10 years, is it possible you will do it all quicker? Because when it comes to so many ESG metrics, I think about what you talk about in terms of housing, the sooner we can do all of this, the better it is for so many members of our society. Is it likely that it's going to take 10 years, or can you do it quicker?
So I think that we have, like I said earlier, it's really important to have near-term goals and then also longer-term goals. So if I think about our commitments in the energy space, yes, we want to, we have zero greenhouse gas emissions or net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. But that means we need to stop relying on carbon emissions by the year 2030. And we need to dramatically invest in renewable energies between now and 2040. And so I think that there's going to be some quick wins. And if you think about it from the social side of things, the S side of things, we've invested somewhere, in the range of $240 million in philanthropic investments in the year 2021 to do just what you've referenced. So if you think about food security, that our investments in the area of food security provided 159 million meals for people who are food insecure.
Right.
And 40% of the meals are supporting those people who are racially diverse and food insecure, so that we're making sure that help is getting to people today.
Well, we appreciate your time and just checking in with us and getting an update on all the efforts you guys are doing. Joanne Dwyer, she's VP of Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability at CVS Health via Zoom from Rhode Island.
Joe Matthew is with us now. He's the host of Sound On. Joe, one of the big stories, of course, today has to do with something that happened in our own backyard here in Brooklyn, in New York. How are you covering the shooting that happened in the subway earlier?
8:30 in the morning. I think there we go. 8:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is a miracle that we're talking about non-life-threatening injuries. The number of people who were there, who were part of this, who saw it. It's been horrifying, and we've been in touch with a lot of people today. We will continue to do this. In fact, we're going to have the former mayor, Bill de Blasio, come on with us in just a moment. We should also mention, though, that we're standing by for another briefing. We all have the same questions we're asking here. We don't have many answers. So as soon as they do reach the microphones, we'll bring that to you.
That's from the New York Police Department. We are expecting that briefing at 5 p.m. Wall Street time. Joe Matthew on Sound On. Coming up in just a moment, what we know is 16 hurt, 10 with gunshot wounds, and police are seeking a black man with a green vest, so the hunt is on here, Tim.
Yeah, the NYPD says there are no active explosive devices.
All right, coming up next, Sound On with Joe Matthew. For Tim Stanovic and the Business Week team, have a good and safe evening, everyone. I'm Carol Massar. This is Bloomberg.